Welcome, chess family. We are going to talk about castling. Now, castling is a unique king's move. We want to get the king to safety. And in order to do that, we must first clear out space for the king and rook to castle. So we're going to start off by pushing the king's pawn up to create space in order to castle. Then we're going to remove the bishop, right? And then last but not least, the knight is moved out of the way. So as we can see, it is space available for the king and rook to castle. Now, a castle is a king's move. So we must move the king first. Now it's real simple. The king just moved 2 spaces towards the available space. Okay? And then the rook goes on the opposite side of the king. So there you have it. That is called a king-side castle or a short castle. It took only 3 pieces to be removed. We had the pawn push, we had the bishop exile, and we had the knight exile. And then we had the space in order for the king and rook to castle. Now, the king can castle on both sides, okay? We want to castle on the left side now. This is known as a long castle or queenside castle. Okay, so same idea. We need to clear space. So the queen's pawn can either move to d3 or d4. I chose d4. The knight has to move. He goes to c3. The bishop clears space. He goes to f4. Now, the queen has to move as well. This is why this is called a long castle, because it takes 4 pieces to move in order for the king to castle. The king, likewise, only moved 2 spaces to the left. You know, the king has to move towards the available space. So once again, he moves 2 spaces towards the left. Okay, as you can see. And the rook only goes on the opposite side of the king. That's it. So there we have a castle. Okay, so now we're going to deal with when you cannot castle. So now, castling is a king's move. And in order to castle, you have to have space. But not only space, the rooks have to be in their original position. And so does the king. The king and rook have to be in their original positions in order to castle. So if you look at this diagram, the rook on the king side, h1, is no longer h1. He's on g1. So that means he obviously moved to the left. So therefore, a king cannot castle to the right any longer because the rook have moved from its original position. But the rook on the queen side, rook a1, is still intact. He's still in his original position. So the king can castle queen side. Okay. Look at this diagram. Both rooks are no longer in their original square or their original position. So obviously, the king cannot castle queen or king side. Okay, now look at this diagram. The king can only castle king side because the knight has not been moved, so the available space is not there. In order for a king to castle, he has to have nothing in between he and the rooks. And we see a knight is in between the rook and the king on the queen side, the long side, the left side. Okay, so look at this diagram. The kings always belong on the e file. Now this king is on the d file. He's on d1. So obviously he moved to get there. So like I said earlier, a king cannot castle to either side if he moves out of his original position. It doesn't matter if he moves back to e1. He still couldn't castle because a king and rooks, they cannot move at all. Okay? And castling is a move to ensure safety to the king. So when you're playing a game of chess, you want to get your pieces out, or what we call develop. You want to develop your pieces as soon as possible. You want to get your king to safety as quick as possible. Okay, so there you go, castling.